Hey, welcome back to our Bible study, Journey with Jesus, where we're going through the Bible chronologically in 1 year using Tara Lee Cobble's The Bible Recap Study Plan. We are on day 16, which is Genesis chapter 12 through Genesis chapter 15. And a commentator I really follow and really respect is David Guzik. Or Guzik, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his last name, but I have mentioned him before, and I really like his commentary. And I'll link him, whether it's in the comments or in the description, but he has described the Bible. We often say the Bible is, it's broke up into the New Testament or the Old Testament versus the New Testament. He suggested that, and I think someone had suggested it to him as well, that we could sum the Bible up from chapter Genesis 1 through 11 as being the problem of sin between Adam and Eve, Noah and the flood, and the Tower of Babel. We just continue seeing the theme of not relying on God, trying to rely on self, and just sin just penetrating every part. And then you get to chapter 12, and it's the beginning of the solution to the sin problem. The Lord begins to put people in place from the family line that Jesus is going to come from. And so with chapter 1 through 11 being the problem, that's the smallest part, right? Like, that's the shortest part of the Bible when you look at it that way. And then it's Genesis 12 through Revelation, an entire solution that God creates to our sin problem. Okay, so in chapter 12, we see the call of Abraham. At the end of chapter 11, we see Terah, Abram. I always do that. His dad was going to the land of Canaan. We don't know if the Lord told him to go there, but they were headed there. And so we see the Lord tell Abram, go from your country. I'm in chapter 12, verse 1. Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. He says, leave your family. Go from your country and your kindred. So he wanted him to leave his family, but he didn't. He went to Canaan, but he took Lot with him. And we'll see that just has so many different issues and consequences to not full obedience. There's a reason that he told him to leave Lot and the rest of his family. And then we see when he gets to Canaan, there's a famine in the land. And instead of trusting God, we see that he fled out of fear and not fully trusting God to Egypt. And because Sarai was so beautiful, he was worried that they were going to kill him because of her. So what does he do? He's like, here, take my wife. She's my sister. She's not really my wife. She's my sister. And then we see God trying to protect his line. That's what we just keep seeing, that he inflicts plagues onto Pharaoh and his family and his house. And the Lord is trying to protect Abram from himself, and he's got a plan, and by means he means to have it come to fruition. So we see him lie there, and then but when he comes back from Egypt, when Abram comes back to where he started, where he was in Canaan, we see him go back to the altar that he made and come back to God. He didn't let the consequences of his mistakes or anything get him down. He repented and he went back to God. And so we see there is partial obedience, right? Like he goes, but he's still going to do it his way. He still wants to bring his family with him. We see he's there, but he doesn't fully trust God, even though God called him there. And he's like, okay, well, I'm going to take it into my own hands. I'm going to make sure to provide for my family. We're going to go to Egypt. Well, Egypt has its own issues, right? And so then he's like, okay, I'm sorry, Lord, please forgive me. And we see him begin to be a little more humble and a little more, but that's it, is there's a heart of humility there, right? Like, it's not a heart of pride that I am going to do this. He realizes the error of his ways and he submits himself back to God. But here we see this next part in chapter 12, we see consequences more of him bringing Lot. The land isn't enough for both of them. And so that creates strife. People are watching them. It says the Canaanites and the Perizzites were there. So they were watching them in these arguments. But Abraham just handles it so gracefully. He's like, you go, you take whatever you want, whatever you see, whatever you want, you can have. And in verse 10, it says, and Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord and like the land of Egypt. He just saw the best and he wanted the best. He was taken over by the lure of the big city. And so he was like, but then it was by Sodom, all the wicked that was there. And it was just so much for him that he wanted it. And so Abraham's like, okay, you can have it. That's fine. And then in verse 14, it says, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot separated from him, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are. And this is where he's telling Abraham, all of this is going to be yours. I will give this to you. I will make you. Everything that is going to be done for you and to you, I am going to do. But what caught my eye in here was that it says, lift up your eyes. So it was Lot lifted his eyes, Abraham lifted his eyes. And so I did a little bit of research, and the lifting of eyes means like a changing in perspective. And so we see two different ways that happens, okay? So Abraham God told him to lift up his eyes. Well, his was a shift in perspective to his godly promises, where Abraham's perspective shifted from earthly, from here, and he saw God's promises in his life, and he saw what God was going to do for him. On the contrast, Lot shifted his perspective to self-centered earthly possessions and his earthly perspective. And this was temporary, right? We see that he's going to end up with nothing, and it's going to be a life of hardship. And because of the consequences of his actions. And there's so much that I could go into, and I'm not even in chapter 14 or 15 yet. And more consequences to bring in Lot, right? Like Abraham has to go and rescue Lot because these kings are in a fight. And the only reason that even matters is because Abraham's family is there, Lot. So he has to take his people and go and rescue him. And in that, once they rescue him, he doesn't come back to Abraham and his family and where they are. He goes back to Sodom. And so it's not like he was rescued. He was rescued out of that, but then he just goes right back to it. But then we have this short little glimpse of Melchizedek. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but we see that as a Christ type. And just how, I'm just going to give a brief thing here where Melchizedek means king of righteousness. He was the king of Salem, which is Jerusalem, which means peace. And so we see that he was the king of righteousness, but also the king of peace. And he was called priest of God Most High. I mean, there's just so many things that are just pointing straight to Jesus. And one of the notable things was he was a king and a priest. What is Jesus, right? Like he is our King of Kings, and he is our priest that goes to God on our behalf. And there's so much I want to go through and say. I may have to do in another video, chapter 15, but I also wanted to highlight the bread and the wine that was presented and how this was a foreshadowing of the Last Supper and just the dedication of it all. And there's so much in here if you just stop and look. My next video is going to be on 15, 16, and 17. And if this resonates with you, if you learned anything, please let me know. And I'll be back with another video. Have a good day.